Okay, so just for fun, I decided I just want to have a go at programming some UI elements, and I figured a button seems like the easiest one to start with. And you can see here in my lovely little diagram, all we're going to essentially do is have some type of rectangle shape the user can put their mouse inside of and click on it, which is going to produce a Boolean value that can be used to trigger something else in our code. So how are we going to do this? That's a great question. Glad you asked. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the height and the width of the letters that are going to go inside of the button, because ideally I want the text of my buttons to be inside of the button and not elsewhere on the screen. I figured that would be bad user design, user interface design. If there happens to be no text inside of the button for whatever crazy reason, then there should just be some default button size somewhere in the code. And once we have the height and the length of a particular letter, which I do believe in Raylib, it is a monospaced font that comes with this library. So that should be very easy to find. In case you've never heard it before, a monospaced font essentially means the letters are all the same size throughout the entire font package, font file. I'm not sure how to describe what a font is properly. But once we have the size of a particular font, we can then use that to draw the rectangle. We can draw the starting point of the rectangle, which will this corner up here, wherever we have decided to draw the actual text. And then we can use the length of all the letters added together to get the length of the rectangle. And then we can use the height of one of the letters, because they should all be the same height, to get the height of the rectangle, how far it should be drawn down. After that, just for some better design and better imaging, we can give the button some padding. So, draw yourself a little bit further up and a little bit further down just to make it better for the user to click on, and probably makes it easier to read the text. And once we have the padding, we can give we can give the button some color and some style. So that is the plan, and let's see how implementing it goes. And with just a few simple lines of code, you can already get a window going and some text drawn inside of Raylib. It's why it's such a useful little library. So this function right here, or procedure, depending on what you want to use the actual technical terminology, is the rl.drawText. RL is just the alias I've given Raylib in this example if you've never seen it before. And we can pass in the text we want printed, the location we wanted printed at, and the color of the text. Now, interestingly enough, I never actually looked into the text procedure before I did this. You do have to give a size to the text, which makes sense. Text can come in different sizes. I'm willing to bet that this is how many pixels one character will take. I'm certain that these characters are about to get printed are printed like on a grid, and that 50 right there means a 50 by 50 pixel square is going to be taken up. So I'm going to do a little test just after we demonstrate what I've got. So I've wrapped this around a for loop real quick, just for fun. And if we back out of this, and then we run this, you can see there's my window, and there's the text getting printed. So we got the text handled. Text was nice and easy. Now, as I was mentioning before, if we just delete this for loop right now, there is a procedure that I have not used in a while, and I think it is called draw rectangle. And I want to say it just takes in the start, the end, and then it takes in, the start, the end, and then I'll take in a color. We'll just make this red right now so it stands out. I'm pretty sure this is how this procedure works. It's been a while since I last used it. If we do odin.run, I get an error, undeclared name. Oh, yes, I got rid of the for loop, didn't I? So we'll have to get rid of these little eyes. I no longer exists. Right, this should hook. Oh, and this multiplication symbol. Let's get rid of you. Did you mean rectangle? I probably did, and I spelled it wrong, no doubt. I got the G mixed up. I fucking suck at spelling. Oh well, that's my curse to bear for my entire life, I guess. Okay, running out. Oh, right, so let's take that offset back. So hopefully what's going to happen right now is if we make this print at 0, 0, that should hopefully just engulf the T completely. The T alone should be surrounded by a square. Ooh, not quite, not quite. The text is slightly bigger than the 50. Math doesn't quite work out, but it works out close enough where I think this will do. So we're going to move on to the next section where we have our text and then we have a rectangle printing behind it and then we give it some padding. Okay, so we're starting to get a bit fancy with it now. What we've done is we've created a new type, and we have created the my button type, and it is a struct. So this struct is going to hold onto all of the information that pertains to a single instance of a button. We have an X and a Y, which is where the button is going to be printed onto the screen. We have a size, which is poorly named because this is actually the size of the text, not the size of the whole button, but oh well. We then have the padding, which will be added to the size to then give, the full size of the button. We have a text, which I believe Raylib under the hood, if you look at the documentation, should be using C strings because it's originally written in C, which means they are null terminated. Odin strings by default, not null terminated. They know their length because they're great. So yeah, we're using C strings instead of regular strings. I imagine it will break if I use a string, and I don't want to do that because I've already broken it a lot just trying to do this simple stuff. We're going to have the length. This is the amount of characters. Wow, we could have used that variable name instead. That would have been way more descriptive. Then we have the action. So when the button's clicked, we want something to happen. We have the foreground color and the background color of the button. Again, terribly named variables. As the foreground color is the color of the text and the background color is the color of the rectangle. If only I had this conversation with myself first before I wrote that. We could have had more description in our code. Then down here, I've created an object of the button type and I've filled in all the values. Notice here, I am cheating. I am just entering 12 in for the amount of characters that are there because I just know there was 12 there, just to see what results I get. And then I'm filling in the draw rectangle procedure and the draw text procedure down below to see what the end result is. And to nobody's surprise, it doesn't quite work properly. So I thought I'd get lucky with the maths in that the button just being, the 50 and stuff that we showed earlier on. Yeah, it turns out way too long. So we're going to have to go ahead and do the other thing, which was not showing how I'm getting the colors for this, not showing the documentation. We are going to have to figure out how to get the length of a character and the length and the width of a character so we can get this rectangle drawn better. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, with a little bit of editing of the code, you can see here we have basically what we wanted as the first stage, the button, the text, and the rectangle being drawn exactly around the text. So we can see how we've done that in the code right now. What I've done is I've created a new procedure called makeButton. And this procedure takes in inputs to everything that a button needs to be made. And they all have default values just to make setting up the button easier. And it returns a type of my button. So to actually get the length of the text, luckily for us, the person who made Raylib was very clever and he figured people would probably want to know this information. So there is a procedure in there right now that is called measure text. I'm not sure if this works with other types of fonts, but I know it does work with the default font of Raylib, and that is good enough for now. So all I'm doing is I pass in the message that is actually going to be printed into the button. And we have test text there. Damn, that is hard to say. And then we pass in the size of the text. I've added a few new names, so F size for the font size. I've also added in an ending X and an ending Y. So we get the length from measuring the text, the ending X. So if the button starts drawn here, the rectangle will stop drawing at the ending X. And the ending Y is simply the length of one of the characters, which is very handy. So we get all the inputs, we get the length, and then we just create a default button filled with all of these values over here. And we set the action to be false to start with. And the padding isn't currently used right now. We then return the button that we have just made. And we do that up here. And then right now, exactly the same thing. We're just drawing the button as normal. So to kind of prove that this works, I'm going to do this live, so hopefully it does work. If we just pass in some string in there, hopefully this string has a rectangle drawn perfectly around it. I didn't test this, so I hope it works. There we go. Yes, I'm very happy that worked. Oh, I'd have to do this again. So if you give this a quick run, you can see that I can now create these buttons, or almost buttons, anywhere I want on the screen. I can give them any amount of text I like. The button is nice and padded around them, and I can also change the colors. And I'm achieving this by doing a few tweaks to that function, procedure. I'm going to say function forever, aren't I? When the procedures in Odin, I made a few tweaks to it. So the way I'm doing the padding is first we're drawing the rectangle at the regular X and Y location that we pass inside of. But when it comes to the text now has its own X and Y location inside of the button struct. As you can see up here, I just added 2 more in 32s. And this time they get the X and Y location, but then the padding gets added onto them. And now, if you notice down here, the rectangle has an ending X and an ending Y now, and it doesn't get the padding applied once, it gets the padding applied twice. The reason for that is when I'm drawing the rectangle, we start here, and then we draw to here, If I just did the padding once, it would go to about here, but this text is already being offset by the same amount, so the text kind of smushes against the end of the rectangle anyways. So for this reason, I'm multiplying the padding by 2, and that's the reason why. That was a terrible explanation, and I'm not gonna repeat that, so I hope you understood it. Fuck me, that was bad. I will get better at this. Anyways, ignoring that bit, you can see here the one next problem that we are having is if I want to make a new button, it's very easy now. I just go button 1, make button. Button 2, make button. Button 3, make button. That's in all the different parameters that I want. And then I'm struggling so much to talk today, apparently. It's been a long day. And then if I want to print them out, I'm having to do this big long mess of coding. It's very verbose and we don't like it. This is a lot of typing over and over again, unnecessary typing. I'm not necessarily against the whole dry, don't repeat yourself thing. If it's only a little bit amount of code, repeat yourself as much as you want. But if you were to make a proper UI system using if more than like 10 buttons, this would be annoying as hell to do. So, I'm going to create this a function, a procedure. I'm going to create this a procedure to wrap it up inside of to make drawing the rectangles easier. And that adjustment is very easily done. We can see all we did was we took the draw procedures out of the main drawing loop and we just wrap them around our own custom procedure called draw button, and we say it takes a button as a parameter, then we just pass our 3 buttons inside of it. Now if we were to run this, you can see nothing's changed. Everything's working just as it was, and that is what we wanted. So the next thing to do is get the actual clicking going on the buttons. That is what I want. So I want to be able to click the buttons. Okay, so after messing around with the code a little bit, because I got a few values mixed up, you can see that I have got a little way of detecting if the mouse is inside of the rectangles. It should have been simple, but apparently I had to do some debugging, so I guess it wasn't that simple for me. And you can see that I have some... basically, I'm just drawing another rectangle. So if the mouse goes inside of one of the rectangles, it's detected that it's inside of the button. All I'm doing is just drawing a third rectangle, or a second rectangle, sorry, behind it. And that's giving that little, just subtle effect that, hey, the mouse is now entered inside of the button. So the way I'm doing that, and it's not the greatest effect, but it's a very easy one to do for now, is, first of all, the structure for my button type now has another boolean, and that is to check if the mouse is inside or not. And when we're drawing the buttons, we will draw them in one of 2 ways. If the mouse is not inside, draw them the way we've been drawing them. But if the mouse is inside, all we're doing is we're just drawing another rectangle behind the already existing buttons, and we're just offsetting that rectangle a little bit so it's a bit bigger than the original button, and then I'm just messing around with the color values. So if you've never worked with Odin before and you've never worked with some of its arrays, Odin has kind of graphics programming. I'm sorry, not graphics programming, but a sort of simple matrix multiplication already built inside of it, where if you have small enough arrays or you're doing simple enough matrix multiplications, Odin can kind of just implicitly do it. I don't have the full explanation here. I need to look into it more myself to fully get all of the examples in which it will work. But in this example, because we have a simple 1D array that is only 4 elements long, I can just plus 60 to this, and that adds 60 to every single values inside of this color array. And that just messes around with the color of the rectangle, so it's a little bit different. Give you a bit more of an indication that, hey, there's something else being drawn behind this. And in order to check if the mouse is inside, I got a procedure down here. I'm doing it in a very naive way. There's probably a more elegant and computationally efficient way to do this, but I don't know it off the top of my head, so I did it this way. I'm getting the mouse's X and Y value. I'm just returning them as the integers. For ease, there is a procedure inside of Raylib that will give you back these in a vector 2 for more precise coding. And then what I'm doing is there's 2 conditions that must be true, the X and the Y condition. So to make sure something is inside of a square, all you do is you check the starting XY of the square and you check the ending XY of the square. And if the thing is greater than the starting XY but less than the ending XY, it must be inside of the square. That is just the simple maths behind is something inside of a square or any type of regular rectangle. And you can see here that I have the 2 checks. If the button is if the mouse X is greater than the button starting position, or if the button is greater than the starting position plus the end. So my variables aren't named as good as they should be. This should actually be the width of the rectangle, and the y should actually be the height of the rectangle, because these values, if you draw the x down here and the y, all the y is just says goes like 100 pixels this way, it doesn't have the x plus the ending coordinate, if that made sense. I really don't think it did. But essentially, to get the calculation to work properly, I need to plus the starting values with the width and the height. So these two, end x and ny, are actually named quite badly. They should be named better in the code to make it easier to understand. If these two conditions are true, then we tell the button that the mouse variable that you have, the mouse inside, is equal to true, in which case when it comes down to drawing the button, we then get this over here. Other thing to note is I am passing the structs in as pointers, and up here I am passing them in as references. I've lost it. It's a bit further up. And up here we're passing the buttons in as references. I feel like I remember reading somewhere that Odin will just implicitly pass by a reference once the structure gets over like 12 bytes, so I might not need, I'm going to test that right now actually. If I was just to get rid of this one here for the third button, which happens to be the one in the middle. Oh no, I guess you do, That doesn't just implicitly happen. Fair enough. Thought that might have, I'm sure it does something like that, and I'm just misremembering what I knew. But yeah, anyways, we have the way of detecting if the mouse is inside. Now, the last thing is to detect when the mouse is clicked and inside of the button. If so, do something. I'm going to get onto that now. Okay, and as you can see, we are done. So we have our 3 buttons here, placed where we want. We can put whatever text inside of them. There's a little bit of padding around. And if we click them, there's actually some functionality. So we have the log to console button. We click that, you can see on the left here, there should be some text being logged out to the console window. We have the change background color. Tapping this just changes the background color between a light mode and a dark mode. And then finally, we have an exit button. We click this and the program closes down. And the way I have implemented this is rather quite simply. So before we had a checking to see if the mouse was inside procedure, but now we just have a single procedure for all of that functionality. Button update, and it takes in the buttons as so. If we come down here, we see that button update is just a wrapper around the button is mouse inside procedure, and the new procedure button is mouse inside. So to get the actual click functionality was really easy. Essentially, I have a procedure down here called button is clicked, and it returns a bool. And all it does is return is the mouse button pressed .left. So check if the mouse left button has been pressed in. But that does not globally get called whenever I want. If you notice inside of here, we have button is mouse inside, and we have the button over here. If that button has been set to true, then this if condition. So if the mouse inside, so if this mouse inside variable over here inside of the button struct, so that own instance of the button has been set to true, this will be true, and therefore we can return whether the button has been clicked or not, or we just return false, that the button has not been clicked. And yeah, that works for all the buttons. You can see if we come out of this right now, Odin.run, we can click anywhere we want, but that's checking to see if the left mouse button has been clicked only triggers if the mouse is inside one of the buttons, and if it is inside one of the buttons, it only gets called at the correct time. So only the correct actual action gets called by the button. And the way I'm assigning these simple actions to the button is if you go over here in the code, you have here, we're checking to see if the button is updating, because the button returns a boolean. It returns false if this hasn't been called. If this has been called, it calls whether or not the mouse has been clicked or not. And then we just have simple do print out to the console. I created a new boolean value. If that is true or false, decide which type of background you are going to print out. So you're going to clear the background either light mode or dark mode. And the exit button, because this is the main loop, if we break out of it, we break out of the whole program. So yeah, that was my little project for the day, just trying to implement my own version of buttons. Raylib already has its own GUI library. It's pretty good from what I remember, but I just want to have a go myself at doing it, because I think, learning to make stuff on your own is pretty good. I enjoy it. So I will see you guys in the next one.